Hello, and welcome to this exploration of the Napoleonic Wars, a series of conflicts that reshaped Europe and the world in the early 19th century. I've long been fascinated by this period, as it represents a pivotal moment in history where the old order of monarchies and empires clashed with the new ideals of nationalism and revolution. The scale and impact of these wars are truly staggering, involving millions of soldiers and spanning nearly all of Europe. Now, before we dive into the details, it's important to understand that these wars didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were, in many ways, a continuation of the French Revolutionary Wars that had begun in 1792. The French Revolution had upended the political order in Europe, and the other great powers were determined to contain its influence. Napoleon's rise to power in 1799 marked a new phase in this ongoing struggle. The wars originated in political forces arising from the French Revolution, 1789–1799, and from the French Revolutionary Wars, 1792–1802, and produced a period of French domination over continental Europe. Napoleon's ascent to power was nothing short of meteoric. After his coup d'etat in 1799, he quickly consolidated his control over France and began to look outward. His military genius was evident from the start, and he wasted no time in challenging the established powers of Europe. The British, ever wary of French power on the continent, were particularly alarmed by Napoleon's ambitions. The formation of coalitions against France became a recurring theme throughout the Napoleonic Wars. These alliances were often fragile and short-lived, but they represented the concerted efforts of Europe's great powers to check French expansion. The Third Coalition, formed in 1805, included Britain, Austria, Russia and Sweden. It's fascinating to see how these traditional rivals set aside their differences in the face of what they perceived as a common threat. Britain gathered allies to form the Third Coalition against the French Empire after Napoleon was self-proclaimed as emperor. Napoleon's response to these coalitions was typically swift and decisive. His campaign of 1805 is a prime example of his strategic brilliance. Moving with incredible speed, he outmaneuvered the Austro-Russian forces and achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Austerlitz in December. This battle, which I consider one of Napoleon's greatest triumphs, effectively knocked Austria out of the war and forced a Russian retreat. At the heart of Napoleon's military success was the Grande Armée, a formidable fighting force that revolutionized warfare in Europe. This wasn't just a large army, it was a highly organized, mobile and flexible instrument of war. Napoleon's use of corps d'armée, essentially self-contained mini-armies, allowed for unprecedented speed and adaptability on the battlefield. The campaigns of 1806 and 1807 demonstrated the full potential of the Grande Armée. In a series of lightning campaigns, Napoleon crushed the Prussian army and forced Russia to the negotiating table. The battles of Jena-Auerstedt and Friedland stand out as particularly decisive engagements. I'm always struck by the speed with which Napoleon could move his forces and concentrate them at the critical point of battle. Napoleon soon defeated the Prussians at Jena-Auerstedt and the Russians at Friedland, bringing an uneasy peace to the continent. By 1807, Napoleon's empire had reached its zenith. He controlled, directly or indirectly, most of continental Europe. The Treaty of Tilsit, signed with Russia, seemed to secure his eastern flank. However, as we'll see, this high-water mark of French power contained the seeds of its own destruction. The sheer scale of Napoleon's conquests made them difficult to maintain, and resistance to French rule was growing in many quarters. The Peninsular War, which began in 1808, marked a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon's decision to intervene in Spain, deposing the Spanish royal family and installing his brother Joseph as king, proved to be a catastrophic mistake. The Spanish people rose up in a fierce guerrilla war that tied down hundreds of thousands of French troops. This conflict, which the French called the Spanish Ulcer, would drain French resources for years to come. But it was the invasion of Russia in 1812 that truly spelled the beginning of the end for Napoleon's empire. The scale of this campaign was unprecedented, with over 600,000 men marching eastward in June. Initially, things seemed to go well for the French, but the Russians' scorched earth tactics and the harsh Russian winter took a devastating toll. The Battle of Borodino, while technically a French victory, was incredibly costly. The battle was the largest and bloodiest single-day action of the Napoleonic Wars, involving more than 250,000 men and resulting in at least 70,000 casualties. The retreat from Moscow was nothing short of catastrophic. Of the vast army that had entered Russia, only a fraction made it back to friendly territory. The human cost was staggering, and the blow to French prestige was incalculable. I've always found the statistics of this campaign almost unbelievable. It's estimated that over 500,000 French and Allied troops died. This disaster emboldened Napoleon's enemies and set the stage for the final acts of the Napoleonic Wars. The years 1813 to 1815 saw the final act of the Napoleonic drama unfold. After the disaster in Russia, a new coalition formed against France, including Russia, Prussia, Austria and Sweden. Despite some initial successes, Napoleon was eventually forced to abdicate in April 1814 after Paris fell to coalition forces. He was exiled to the island of Elba, and the Bourbon monarchy was restored in France. But Napoleon wasn't finished yet. In March 1815, he escaped from Elba and returned to France, beginning the period known as the 100 Days. This led to a final showdown at the Battle of Waterloo in June. I've always found this last campaign fascinating. It was Napoleon's last roll of the dice, and he came closer to success than many people realise. However, the combined forces of Britain and Prussia, led by the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard von Blücher, finally defeated him. Napoleon took about 124,000 men of the Army of the North on a preemptive strike against the Allies in Belgium. He intended to attack the coalition armies before they combined, in hope of driving the British into the sea and the Prussians out of the war. The Congress of Vienna, which had begun in 1814, now set about redrawing the map of Europe. The goal was to create a balance of power that would prevent any one nation from dominating the continent as France had done. This led to significant territorial changes and the creation of new political entities like the German Confederation. The Congress system that emerged would dominate European diplomacy for decades to come. The impact of the Napoleonic Wars on European and world history can hardly be overstated. These conflicts mark the end of the old order in Europe and the beginning of the modern era. The ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality and fraternity, had been spread across the continent even as Napoleon himself had become increasingly autocratic. One of the most significant legacies was the rise of nationalism. The experience of foreign occupation and the wars of liberation had awakened a sense of national identity in many European peoples. This would have profound consequences in the 19th century, leading to the unification of Germany and Italy, among other developments. The wars also accelerated the Industrial Revolution, as nations strove to produce the material needed for modern warfare. The wars revolutionized European warfare. The application of mass conscription and total war led to campaigns of unprecedented scale, as whole nations committed all their economic and industrial resources to a collective war effort. In conclusion, the Napoleonic Wars were a watershed moment in world history. They marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, reshaping the political, social and economic landscape of Europe and beyond. The repercussions of these conflicts would be felt for generations to come, influencing everything from the balance of power in Europe to the spread of revolutionary ideals around the globe. As we've seen, the legacy of Napoleon and the wars that bear his name is complex and far-reaching, continuing to fascinate historians and the public alike to this day. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Napoleonic Wars. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support really does make a difference. And do let me know in the comments if there are any other aspects of this fascinating period you'd like me to explore in future videos. Until next time, farewell.